Just double checking, making sure. And I'd like to thank everyone for joining us here today for our March monthly meeting of the Berks County Amateur Astronomical Society. More info, as always, at berksastronomy.org, or hit us up on our Facebook page. We're constantly updating that as well. We'll get into news and other things and cool space things in our Hangout session. That is for Thursdays, second Thursdays for our lecture series. For our lecture tonight, we are especially lucky to have a special guest with us. Let's see, I gotta pull this up here. Oh boy. And we have Alan Ladwig with us tonight. Alan Ladwig is the chief of Two Orbit Productions that provides consulting services and lectures on space policy, as well as the creation of art projects based on space themes. He served 3 terms at NASA headquarters, and during the Obama administration, he served as the head of public outreach. Under the Clinton administration, he established and was associate administrator of the Office of Policy and Plans. And from 1981 to 89, he was a civil servant and managed a variety of programs for the Office of Education, Office of Spaceflight, and the Office of Exploration. He managed both the Shuttle Student Involvement Program and the Spaceflight Participant Program. He also served as Chief Operations Officer of the Zero Gravity Corporation during its startup phase. So, without further ado, I'd like to give a special warm welcome to our speaker for tonight, Alan Ladwig. Alan, take it away, and if you want us to ask any questions, let us know how you want us to interact.
Okay, well, thank you, Jan. I really appreciate the invitation to speak. The COVID was really a killer for book sales last year. I had to cancel a lot of invitations to go out to the public and speak and sign books. So I'm thankful for these Zoom opportunities and appreciate you all coming tonight. I want to talk to you about my book. It's called See You in Orbit, Our Dream of Spaceflight. And my question, and I can't see everybody, but who would like to fly in space? You know,
me.
A little old, but I'd try it.
Well, and my next question is, what made us think that we were going to get to fly in space? Well, I'll tell you why, because for the past 70 years, the visionaries, government officials, the media, and space industry routinely told us that our ticket to ride was just a rocket away, and that we were all going to be going flying in space soon. So my book covers a 70-year history period, which is a lot, but that's how long people have been talking about flying in space for the general public. And it's so the book is a comprehensive review of the history and a bit of a glimpse of the future. I stopped researching in July of 2019, so a lot has happened since then to carry on this story. And I hope other researchers will continue to tell the space tourism narrative. And to tell this story, I tried to overlay what was being said about space tourism on top of what was actually happening with the space program. So you start to see this kind of juxtaposition of reality versus vision, and it's been an interesting story. Oop, why am I not? Oh, there, let's try this. There we go. The quest to fly in space has been a dream for centuries. It's in our mythology with Icarus and his wings of wax and feathers. And for many, the dream was ignited in 1865 when Jules Verne wrote the book From Earth to the Moon. That's the cover on the right. And what was going on in 1865? The Civil War. So imagine way back then, Jules Verne is talking about space flight. Well, those dreams of space flight were the inspiration for some of the early Rocketeers, including the Russian math teacher, Konstantin Tsiolkovsky. And he wrote a paper in 1903 called Investigation of Outer Space with Reactive Devices. What else was happening in 1903? Anybody? Bueller. It was when the Wright brothers flew. So here, when the Wright were just getting off the ground with airplanes, Constantine is talking about a space station that it was 300 feet long, that would have passengers. He called it a rocket train that could launch in 2017. So that's how the dream started in the early 1900s. Then the American father of rocketry, Robert Goddard, was inspired by Jules Verne. And he wrote a paper in 1919 called A Method of Reaching Extreme Altitudes. And within a year of that paper, where he speculated about the possibility of sending a rocket to the moon, he started getting letters from hundreds of people that wanted to volunteer to fly on this rocket, which was only theoretical at that point. And the people that wrote to him wanted to go for a wide variety of reasons, to find meaning for their meaningless lives, to find inspiration, to come back and run for president. Some people wanted to send Congress on a one-way trip to moon. And a lot of things haven't changed, obviously. So he was but he was not happy with all these letters he was getting. To him, it was a distraction. He just wanted to focus on rockets. And then in 1923 in Germany, Hermann Oberth self-published his book called Rocketry into Interplanetary Space. And it was a book that talked about his dreams of space flight. He was one of the founding members of the German Society of Space Travel. He also ended up being a technical consultant to Fritz Lang's first science fiction movie, Women in the Moon. In fact, for the premiere of that movie, Fritz wanted Hermann to have a rocket launch at the premiere, but that part never quite worked out. So here in the early 1900s, the seeds of the dream are starting to occur. Then we move into the 1950s. And in 1950, at the Hayden Planetarium in New York City, Willy Ley, a German historian, gave a lecture called The Conquest of Space. He was a writer of popular space books, especially for young people. And so as a stunt for the event, the Hayden Planetarium set up an interplanetary tour reservation booth in the lobby. And they handed out these cards. And you put in your name and address and send it in and check where did you want to go? The moon, Venus, Mars, Jupiter, Saturn, and then send that in. Now, the Hayden Planetarium Auditorium held 800 people. Over the next 3 years, what started out as a stunt, mushroom, went, to use today's language, went viral, and they got 22,000 letters over the next 3 years from people wanting to sign up to go. And the estimated time of departure was going to be 1975, I think. The time schedule was you could go to the moon in 9.5 hours, to Mars in 75 days, or to Saturn in a little over 1,000 days. So why it takes us 8 months to get to Mars these days, who knows? But that's what they were saying back then. So that lecture proved so popular with all this publicity it got, and science fiction movies, space movies were setting up reservation tours in the lobbies of theaters to play on this. So then that led to a second lecture in the following year, and this time Wernher von Braun came to lecture, and several others, including a mild-mannered engineer named Milton Rosen. And von Braun got up and spoke eloquently on his visions of flotillas to Mars and all this, space stations and 70 spacecraft on their way to Mars. And meanwhile, Milt Rosen from the Navy got up and said, this is all a little too much. Right now, we don't know where a rocket's going to land. Could be very bad for a passenger. And you see the little monkey on the bottom left-hand corner here. We were routinely blowing up monkeys at White Sands at that time, as von Braun is quoting this big vision. So you see his vision there on the right-hand corner. Then it took another step And again, if anybody has any comments or questions along the way or want to challenge my history, please speak up. So then at that lecture, there were two editors from Collier's magazine. Some of us are of the age that we know what Collier's was. They put out an 8-part series on the future of space exploration and von Braun was there and many of his colleagues that came together and put together these stories over a period between 1952 and 1954. It was the first time the notion of popular space travel was brought to the general public through non-technical publications. That in turn impressed Walt Disney, and he decided to bring the space story to his Sunday night program, Disneyland. I'm sure many of us remember watching that, sponsored by Peter Pan Peanut Butter. And that was on Sunday evenings, a 3-part series. And again, von Braun and that same team that worked with Collier worked with Disney. And they put out, Disney even put out comic books about it. And it was a very popular series at the time. They told the story of space through lectures by von Braun and his colleagues and cartoons. And it was I still remember to this day how enamored I was by that program or those programs. Then we move forward into 1958 when finally America started to get serious about space travel. And with the creation of NASA in 1958, on December 17th, 1958, on the 55th anniversary of the Wright brothers' first flight, NASA Administrator T. Keith Glennon put out a call for astronauts. So dreamers from around the world saw this as their chance to achieve their quest to fly in space. However, President Eisenhower determined something a little different. At first, NASA was going to put out this general inquiry for people to apply. And then Eisenhower stepped in and said, no, we're going to go with military test pilots because they had clearances already. And even though NASA was a civilian agency at Eisenhower's request, they wanted to go with military pilots. One of the NASA managers at this time said it was one of the best decisions Eisenhower made because it ruled out matadors, mountain climbers, scuba divers, and race car drivers, among others. So those who were selected were assigned to Project Mercury, the first manned space program, human space program for NASA. And these 7 astronauts became American heroes. And they were seen on par with Superman. Their stories were told in Life magazine. They were feted everywhere they went. They became America's boy next door and heroes. And they were going to fly in this little Mercury capsule you see in the bottom right corner. Now, meanwhile, while we're focused on single individuals in these capsules, which would have been on chemical rockets, leftover or versions of military rockets, there was a conference going on in 1958 overseas, the International Astronautical Federation, 2 years after the call for astronauts, and an engineer, Max Hunter, regaled delegates with his plans for a class of nuclear spaceship, which you see in the bottom right. And I want to read you a little something that was said about those rockets at the time. Max Hunter, in his paper, Direct Operating Costs of a Class of Nuclear Spaceships, he and his fellow Douglas Aircraft Company engineers thought that nuclear rockets were an alternative to chemical rockets. And he said, nuclear rockets have been found to present near-term capability for the exploration and possible exploitation of the moon and nearby planets based on the achievability of cargo carrying direct cost on the order of $1 a pound. This was really something to make that kind of a call. Well, he did speculate, well, your luggage might go for $1 a pound, but for the personal transport, it would be more like $500 to $5,000 per pound for a round trip lunar or one-way Martian mission, respectively. Time magazine wrote it up and introduced the story this way: sing song, merry-go-round, here we go off to the moon, oh. The article didn't specify when, but left the impression that it wouldn't be long before space travelers would be able to suit up and fly right. Cost of a round trip ticket to the moon, the article concluded, would be $900, $40 less than the current first class jet fare from New York to Paris and back. So again, why did you think you were going to get to go? Because you were being told you were going to get to go. Well, what about women in this time frame? This is Women's History Month, and I think yesterday was International Women in Space Day. So what about women? Well, I can assure you that in the 1959 to 1961 period, few space planners were thinking anything about the notion of women astronauts. Throughout the cultural platforms of the time, women were not seen sitting in the commander's seat, but rather as flight attendants or sexy space vixens. In his book titled, Spaceflight, The Coming of Exploration of the Universe, author Lester Del Rey did think that women definitely would fly in space. And at the time, here's what he said: girls will also want to go out into space. They will probably do at least as well as men. For long and difficult trips, women may be preferred, since it's been proved that they are able to stand monotony better than men. Some girls may even become pilots. Now remember, this is in 1957, he's writing this. The word spaceman must be used to mean either boys or girls, with no difference in the type of job they will do. Well, Lester may have thought that, but meanwhile, at the 1958 Commonwealth Space Symposium in London, other people didn't feel that way. Dr. T.C. Harvey had male delegates rolling in the aisles with laughter when he proposed that two men and a woman, preferably not a shapely blonde, be sent as an ideal team to the moon. When the rollicking conferees got a grip on themselves, Dr. Helvey explained his opinion was based on a combination of logic and human psychology. Experts in human factors believed that sending three men in a can could spell trouble. So they were convinced that if a woman went along for the cruise, hostility could be cooled, tensions eased out of respect to her. Wasn't that nice? Well, there were women that were very serious about wanting to go. And among them was Jerry Cobb. She was a young woman from Oklahoma. She was an accomplished pilot, and she held many records for aviation for women and even for men. She ran in 1959 into Dr. Randolph Lovelace and Brigadier General Don Flickinger at a hotel in Florida at a conference they were at. And they got to talking with her, and these two gentlemen were the ones that had conducted the physical exams for the Mercury astronauts. And they wondered, how might a woman do in such tests? So, though it was not requested or approved by NASA, they went ahead and tested Cobb, and there were 3 phases. She passed them all with flying colors, except she wasn't going to get to be an astronaut. Then, to validate that she was not just a flash in the pan, the Dr. Lovelace and General Flickinger thought that they should test more women. So they came up with 12 more women to go through the test. But before they could get through the second test, the flights were canceled. They were canceled by the Navy because the Navy was conducting the test. And the Navy said, somebody's got to pay for this. So they went to NASA to say, are you going to pay for these tests? NASA said, we don't have a requirement for the test. So they kept getting this runaround back and forth, and they just could not get the test going. NASA didn't want any part of it. This in turn led to hearings on Capitol Hill that Jerry Cobb pushed for, and along with her, Jane Hart, who is the wife of Senator Hart of, I think, Michigan, or Michigan, Minnesota, I'm drawing a blank. So they went before this committee to talk about, could women fly in space? And when at their opening remarks, Cobb and Hart said, "We hope that you will help implement the inclusion of qualified women in the U.S. manned space program. They weren't there to join the battle of the sexes, only a place in our nation's space future without discrimination." Jane Hart even said, "It's inconceivable to me that the world of outer space should be restricted to men only, like some kind of stag club." She was really pressing on that one. Well, the hearings went on. They were supposed to go on for 2 days. The congressmen were not all that receptive to the women. They kept showing that, well, you don't have jet fighter qualifications. Well, why didn't they? Because women weren't allowed in the military at that time, and that's the only place you could learn how to fly jets. So it went back and forth. It was very contentious. I highly recommend reading the transcript of those hearings because you'll really, women will go crazy and men will be embarrassed, trust me. The one person that stood up for them was a congressman from Pennsylvania, James Fulton. He was a very colorful guy. He wanted to go into space himself, and he had the last word for the day when he concluded that since women paid taxes, they had as much right to use the equipment as men. Secondly, when scientists first started putting living animals in space, it is rather remarkable that both the dogs and the monkey were all, without exception, female. Well, he really fell on his sword for the women, unfortunately got nowhere. That afternoon, another person that spoke was another aviatrix, Jacqueline Cochran. She held a lot of space records as well. She was the first woman to break the sound barrier. She did get to fly a jet, and no less than Chuck Yeager was her escort in a chase plane. She became a successful multimillionaire as a cosmetic heiress or a president, and she paid for the travel for the 12 women to go to those tests. But when it came to the hearings, she turned on the women. She said that there were enough men, we didn't need the women. And in fact, what really set Cobb and Hart back was when she said, oh, and by the way, Cochran was the head of the Women's Air Corps during World War II. But she didn't see the need to rush for a female astronaut program at this time. She said it would slow down the regular program and waste a great deal of money. And when you take a large group of women in, you lose them through marriage. That is why women are not on airplanes as commercial pilots. You spend all that money training them, and then they run off and get married and get pregnant. Isn't that just like a woman? So this was the feeling at that time about women. NASA manager and 2 astronauts, including John Glenn and Scott Carpenter, also testified. And of course, all they said was, we don't need women, we've got men. And is the purpose to get to the moon before anybody else, or is it to fly a woman? So it was a very contentious time for women. But women weren't the only ones that were having problems meeting their dreams for space. African Americans faced the same kind of opposition. And it came upon Edward R Murrow. A lot of us will remember Edward R Murrow from his programs on CBS. He was a very popular journalist at the time. And he had this to say. He wrote a letter to the NASA administrator, James Webb, and at the time, he was the head of the United States Information Agency. And he said to Webb, why don't you put the first non-white in space? He thought NASA should enroll and train a qualified Negro and then fly him in whatever vehicle is available. Wearing his USIA hat, Murrow saw the positive contribution this could make in retelling our whole space effort to the whole non-white world, which is most of it. So they came upon, and then Whitney Young from the National Urban League recommended to President Kennedy that an African-American would fly. So they came upon Captain Ed Dwight, an Air Force officer and pilot. And so they had him go to the Air Force Test Pilot School at the Air Force Test Pilot School at Edwards Air Force Base in California. But he endured some significant harassment. I mean, he thought he was going to go there, and he said, I knew that being a test pilot was a step towards space training. Now I'm getting that next step. And he became a hero to the African American community. He was on magazine covers that the African Americans read regularly. And everybody really thought this was going to be a great thing. Unfortunately, the people at Edwards weren't aligned with that. In fact, a senior military officer came up to Dwight one day and challenged him and said, who got you into this school? Was it the NAACP or some kind of black Muslim out there to make trouble? Why in hell would a colored guy want to go into space anyway? As far as I'm concerned, there will never be one to do it. And if it was left to me, you guys wouldn't even get a chance to wear an Air Force uniform. That kind of institutional and personal racism remains as gut-wrenching now as it surely must have been then. Well, eventually, Dwight gave up. He was not recommended to take the next step to become an astronaut. He ended up resigning from the Air Force and went and moved to Colorado to become a very famous sculptor. But the pushback was horrible for him, and he retired in 1966. The next hope for African Americans was in 1967 when Lyndon Johnson encouraged the Air Force to try again to identify an African American astronaut. And through the Air Force Manned Orbiting Lab Program, Major Robert Lawrence, a pilot with a PhD and 2,500 jet flight hours, was selected in July to become a MOL astronaut, Manned Orbiting Lab. Tragically, the following December, Major Lawrence was killed in a crash during a test flight with an F-106 while he was in the back seat as an instructor. So with his death, it would take another 11 years before African Americans would be welcomed into the astronaut corps. And given the current Black Lives Matter moment and last month being Black History Month, I recommend that you try to read more about Dwight Edwards' story. And again, anytime they tried to open the aperture to become an astronaut, the pinnacle astronauts, the test pilot astronauts, always threw up a red flag. They thought only test pilots should be astronauts. But since 1962, the National Academy of Science had been encouraging NASA to include a working scientist in the astronaut corps. They especially wanted to see a scientist on the first mission to the moon. Finally, in 1964, 5 years before the Apollo landing on the moon, they were allowed to apply to the Group 4 astronaut selection. The women did apply, but none were selected for that. And in June of '65, the first all-male Science Dash astronauts were selected. And the test pilot astronauts made a point of calling them the hyphenated astronauts, the Scientist Dash astronauts. And here's what author Tom Wolfe had to say about that in an article he did for Rolling Stone. Confronted with the fact that there was going to be a new breed called science astronauts. What is this? These guys aren't even Cessna weekenders, the majority of them. The right stuff? No stuff, baby. It was suddenly like integrating the Masonic Lodge with Black women. Clearly, jet jockeys still felt they were the only ones qualified to escape gravity. And of course, as we know, there was not a scientist on the first Apollo mission, and only through a lot of effort did we see a scientist on any Apollo mission, and that was Harrison Schmitt, who you see in the middle of the front row here, who flew on Apollo 17. So then we take it up more. Let's get back to the story of regular people wanting to fly. In 1964, the Martin Company, recommended that a National Geographic photojournalist should fly on a Gemini mission. And at this time, there'd only been 8 human missions. And so the implication was it was safe enough to fly that a photojournalist should sit in the second Gemini seat. Well, you can imagine how that went over with the astronauts. And not only that, it still was pretty dangerous. 2 years later in '66 was Gemini 8, when astronaut Neil Armstrong and David Scott had a horrible incident where their vehicle was tumbling ass over tea kettle when they were trying to rendezvous with another spacecraft. And only through Neil Armstrong's superb piloting skills was the mission saved. So it was still a risky business then, but people are starting to talk about, well, why can't other people go? Then in 1968, a year before Apollo 11, the movie 2001: A Space Odyssey came out. And we all know what that did for the dream of spaceflight. You saw that space station, you saw the Pan Am Clipper shooting out the bottom of it. And everybody thought, oh boy, we're going to get to go there. There was a Hilton Hotel. And so Pan Am jumped on that popularity. And from 1968 to 1971, they created something called the Pan Am First Moon Flights Club. And in that 3-year period, 93,000 people signed up for that flight. When I was the head, and I'm getting a little ahead of the story, when I was the head of the Spaceflight Participant Program at NASA, people used to send me, you see the card on the right, copies of their card, their Pan Am card, and people that had the Hayden Planetarium card sent copies of that to me to say, could they trade that in for a flight on the space shuttle? Of course, the funny part was that then a few years later, Pan Am couldn't even shuttle people from DC to New York and went out of business, as did the First Moon Flight Club. Well, the dream starts another boost in the 70s with the approval of the space shuttle. And in January of '72, the shuttle was approved. The last Apollo flight, Apollo 17, was December of '72. So while the Apollo program is still going on, we have our first look at what's going to come beyond Apollo, and that was the shuttle. You see many concepts there on the left of what was being looked at. President Nixon, who approved the shuttle program, said, I have decided today the United States should proceed at once with the development of an entirely new type of space transportation system designed to help and transform the space frontier of the '70s into familiar territory, easily accessible for human endeavor in the '80s and the '90s. And he said he wanted to take the astronomical cost out of astronautics. So people started getting excited. There were articles that starting to be published. They called the space shuttle the New Age Prairie Schooner. They said there would be 60 flights a year and it would only need a crew of 3, but it could take 7 passengers. So if there was only a crew of 3, that meant 4 seats could be available for the public. And so everybody's getting very excited about this. Of course, as time went on, that number of 60 flights a year kept coming down considerably. But again, why the dream? Well, let me tell you what a NASA study in 1976 said about commercial space travel. And this was called Outlook for Space, Commercial Space Transportation. Or in a section titled Commercial Space Transportation for People and Goods, they said, they predicted that by the turn of the century, the cost to place a pound of payload into orbit might come down to $50 per kilogram, $100 per pound, and eventually down to $10 to $20 per kilogram. It would then be reasonable to think of such transport in terms of passengers with operational costs of $1,000 to $2,000 each. We cannot ignore the possible eventual use of space travel for entertainment and recreation. So again, why shouldn't we be excited about space travel? Here, NASA, the premier space agency of the country, is telling us we can expect $1,000 to $2,000 tickets. Well, it didn't quite work out that way. Meanwhile, in the 70s, while the shuttle was being developed, women and minorities were finally encouraged to apply as NASA astronauts. And this was a big push. Lately, there's even been articles to remind us that the actress Nichelle Nichols from Star Trek did promotional advertising for NASA to try to encourage African Americans and women to apply. So they did apply. And in 1979, January of 79, the pilots and the first mission specialists were announced. They called themselves the 35 New Guys. It was the largest selection of astronauts to date, and it included women, minorities, and the first Asian American. The first African Americans and the first Asian Americans. So things started looking better for everybody by that point. Then there was another, with the mission specialist category, prior to that, you had to be a pilot. So now with the shuttle, you could be a scientist and fly. So in addition to the mission specialist category, we had a payload specialist category that was created. And the first payload specialist was Byron Lichtenberg and Ulf Merbold, the first non-US citizen to fly. He was from Germany. And then Charlie Walker became the first corporate payload specialist to fly in 1984. And a payload specialist was somebody that was trained to perform a certain experiment that it was felt it was easier to train them to fly and do their experiment than to train a mission specialist astronaut to do the experiment. So that was a big change. And in the early 80s, that was also a way to promote the shuttle to get corporations in other countries to fly their payloads on the space shuttle. Because if they would do that, their company or their country would then get to fly a payload specialist. Well, then we move forward a little more where the dream really starts rocking. And that was in 1984. When James Begg had come into office in 1981, he was besieged with people wanting to fly on the space shuttle. And this included celebrities and members of Congress, people who thought they were VIPs. And he got a little tired of dealing with it. So he went to the NASA Advisory Council and said, we are without a procedure. And he tasked them to go off and look at, would it be appropriate to fly a civilian, a non-astronaut on the space shuttle? And that committee took a year to go off and look. They consulted with opinion leaders, with astronauts, with scientists, with engineers, and they came back and said that, yes, it would be appropriate to fly a citizen on a space flight as long as there was a purpose. And that purpose was to communicate. And they recommended 3 categories: a broadcast journalist, a written journalist, or a teacher. And then an internal NASA committee was formed that I was the executive secretary of and became manager of the Teacher in Space program. They decided a teacher should go first. So that program was announced by President Reagan in August of 1984. Some years later, or 1985, we also announced the Journalists in Space program. So those were going to be the first 2 opportunities. And as we may have recalled, the teachers went to the head of the class. We had 2 finalists per state and the overseas installations. And we brought them all to Washington, D.C. in August of 85. And that group of 112 was pared down to 10. And you see the 10 finalists in the upper left with the late Administrator James Beggs. Then the first teacher was announced at the White House in let's see, I'm getting my dates mixed up here, sorry. The Teacher in Space was announced in August of 84. And I guess, and at some point we announced her as Chris Mcauliffe as the winner. not by Reagan because he was in the hospital at that time, but Vice President Bush was on hand to welcome Krista McAuliffe and the other 9 finalists to the White House. Then in the bottom left, you see Krista McAuliffe and the backup teacher, Barbara Morgan. Krista was from New Hampshire, a high school social studies teacher. Barbara was from an elementary teacher from Idaho. And then Krista was assigned to mission 51L, which was scheduled to fly in January of 1986. And we all kind of know what happened to that. Didn't exactly work out as planned. Nonetheless, during that time frame, while we were doing the teacher program, while we were doing the journalist program, getting that thing up and running, there were other proposals of how we could get more people in space. Somebody came up with the idea to put a module in the cargo bay of the space shuttle, and it could hold up to 40 people, and they would pay a certain fee to go. Another company called Society Expeditions had an idea for a private spacecraft that they were going to build, and they wanted to fly for the first time on the 500th anniversary of Columbus. They had people sign up, including the entire alumni of, I think it was Stanford University was going to go. Again, it didn't quite work out. But things did start to change a little bit. And then in 1995, you had the X Prize. And this was a prize much like the prize that Charles Lindbergh won by flying to Paris. This was going to be who could send 3 people in a spacecraft up to 62 miles and then in 14 days turn the vehicle around and fly it again. And that was announced in 1995, or the idea was announced in 95. It was officially kicked off in St. Louis in 1996. And it was predicted that someone would win in 3 to 5 years, and 1 to 2 years after that, commercial tickets would be available. Well, it was eventually won, not in 3 to 5 years, but in October of 2004 by Burt Rutan and Richard Branson, and they won the $10 million X Prize. Then the whole notion of space got another boost when we had the first tourists or researchers to fly in space. But this wasn't done by America. This was done by the Russians and through an American company called Space Adventures. And the first person to go up was Dennis Tito, an American. And he had made millions through some kind of computer business. And he was going to fly with the Russians up to the space station. Now, NASA and the European Space Agency were not happy with this at all. In fact, they objected vehemently to having somebody come up to the space station. And they even demanded that he could only be on the Russian side of the space station. But he did go in April of 2001 against the objections. And then over the next 9 years, 6 other people flew, including the first woman, Anush Ansari, who, by the way, became the sponsor of the Ansari X Prize and with the $10 million. And then you had Richard Garriott down here in the bottom. Richard Garriott became the first son of an astronaut to fly. And he went up. He was a game designer, made a lot of money. And in fact, he was in the news just last week because he became also one of the first people to go down to extreme depths in the ocean into the Mariana Trenches. So what about the rest of us? What about the rest of us that aren't millionaires? How are we going to get to go? Well, Virgin won the competition in 2004, and they predicted that the first commercial flights would take place in 2010. And you see on the left their protocol, or how they were going to do that. They would fly this vehicle, their spacecraft, underneath that double fuselage plane. And then once they got up to a certain altitude, the rocket engine would drop off and go into space. And the capsule could carry up to 6 people. So they've had some test flights with this. They've sent up people on their test flights, but they are a bit behind schedule. And every year, Richard Branson keeps saying the date is going to change. So from the first prediction of 2010, it's now looking like it probably won't happen until maybe late this year, maybe not till 2022. And at the same time, there's Blue Origin, owned by Jeff Bezos. And Blue Origin was formed in 2000, actually 4 years before Branson. And he's got a different mission profile. He's got a regular rocket that will go up, the capsule will take off, and then land with a parachute. And they've done their test flights, but they haven't put any people on board yet. And so again, they're behind schedule. They also, by the way, Virgin Galactic has announced their price, which was at $250,000. And they've got over 600 people that have signed up for that and are waiting in line. Blue Origin has yet to announce what their tickets are going to cost, and they're not yet taking reservations, but perhaps they hope to fly maybe 2022 as well. So then we have this reversal of fortune. Remember I said how NASA and ESA were against having private astronauts come up to the space station? Well, in June of 2019, NASA agreed to have 2 short duration private astronaut missions per year for 30-day stays at the space station. And you would get there by flying with either SpaceX or Boeing's Starliner. Now, SpaceX has flown their Dragon capsule a couple of times. It's going to fly again here in the next month or so. Boeing still hasn't flown their capsule, which you see on the right there, Starliner, with anybody on board. They had an unmanned test flight that had some issues, and we're still waiting to hear when they'll fly again. But it'll probably cost about $50 million for the transportation. Then once you get to the space station, NASA is going to charge $35,000 per night for incidentals. So your air, using the bathroom, food, Wi-Fi. So and people are already signing up for this. So 20 years afterwards, we've come a long way with things in space. The International Space Station has been up for all these years. We had the first 2 women did a spacewalk recently, and let's see, last November. We had a very diverse crew that's up there now. The first woman pilot for an extended stay to fly on the Boeing Starliner has been announced. So there's a lot of things that have happened with women, minorities. The caliber of the looks of people are starting to change considerably as we go forward. Then there's what I call the scent of Musk. Elon Musk has been a game changer for the entire space program. He is doing things that nobody thought was possible, that NASA was always too conservative to try. Not necessarily always their fault because they get told what to do by Congress and the president, but admit it, we all know what Elon is up to. In addition to Tesla, in addition to his boring thing he's going to build, he's building a new spaceship. He's been testing them recently. Sometimes they've been successful going up. They haven't been quite as successful coming down, but he continues to march ahead. And he plans to launch people on an orbit to the moon in 2023, and that the same vehicle could be used to take 100 people to Mars by 2030. And that's a very ambitious undertaking. Will he make it on that time schedule? Who knows? He says that many of his goals are truly aspirational, but he's in there fighting all the time. And he's not the only person doing this. There are other people out there trying to expand how many people get to go into space. You've got commercial space stations and hotels that are on the docket. Axiom, you see in the upper left, want to connect their space station to the International Space Station, and they've already got a crew that's going to go up and do that. Then you've got something called the Gateway Foundation. You see that's circular space station on the right. They claim that they can fly 100 tourists by 2025. And then Space for Humanity wants to pay to take people on, first of all, suborbital flights, then orbital flights, lunar flights, and maybe someday Mars flights. But they want to pay to take 10,000 people into space. So it's very exciting. Even though you may not have the millions of dollars to go yourself, there might be ways that other people are doing competitions and things that you'll be able to participate. And in fact, it's already happening. Inspiration 4 is a mission that has been announced by a wealthy entrepreneur, Jared Isaacman. He's the founder and CEO of a company called Shift 4. And on Inspiration 4, he wants to take 4 civilians on a mission. And this will be the first time you have an all-civilian mission to space. He's going to be the commander. He'll be the first private individual to command a space mission. And he wants to take along a total of 4 people. And he's already selected one of those, and that's Haley Arsenault. She's a bone cancer survivor, and she's been named as, he's got these names for each of the crew members, and she represents hope. And by the way, he's doing all this to help raise money for the St. Jude Children's Research Hospital. He's trying to raise $250 million. So in addition to doing the mission to space, he's trying to do good things on Earth, and he's been doing this campaign to raise money. So there's 2 more slots then still to come, and that's the generosity slot and the prosperity slot. And those could be announced later this year, perhaps later this spring sometime. So that's going to be very exciting to watch and see how that progresses. Then there's another project called Dear Moon, and this is by a Japanese billionaire, Yasuko Maezawa, and he's inviting the public for a spot on a SpaceX's Starship for a private mission around the moon. And they won't land on the moon, but they'll orbit the moon. And he wants to reach out to a wider and more diverse audience to represent humanity in space. Originally, he said he was going to take 8 people along that were all going to be artists. But lately, he's changed his mind to make it a wider and more diverse group. The trip is slated for 2023. That date may or may not hold, given how SpaceX and their Starship progresses. But he said he wants all kinds of people from all backgrounds to join. And when the contest applicants, the applications are now being accepted as of last week, and he's going to take 10 to 12 people in all, but 8 of those will be from the public. So that's a very exciting mission. And again, will that happen in 2023, or will this be more hype that doesn't take place? Let's hold on to our seats and see. Meanwhile, women are going to have another big step with the Artemis program. And that means that when we return to the moon, the goal was 2024. Whether or not that holds depends on funding and other technical challenges. But for those of us old enough who used to watch The Honeymooners, you remember the famous line from Jackie Gleason, "One of these days, Alice, bang, zoom, straight to the moon." And so a woman will finally be landing on the moon. So, see you in orbit? Well, we'll have to see. A professor has been studying space tourism for years, came up with the notion of what he called the phased approach. And so he said there'd be a pioneering phase, an exclusive phase, a mature phase, and a mass market phase. And in the pioneering phase, you'd get to, oh, by the way, he said by 2028, space tourism would be a $14 billion market. And he said this because there's 1.8 million people worth $10 million that could afford the trip. So I think I adjusted these numbers slightly from what he had said back in the early 80s. And so I'm saying a pioneering phase is we're in kind of now. 250,000 for a suborbital flight, 55 million to orbit or to the space station. An exclusive phase might bring that cost down to 150,000 for suborbital, $30,000 for orbit flights, 30 million for orbital flights. A mature phase of 100,000 suborbital, 10 million for an orbital flight, and a mass market phase of 50,000 suborbital and 5 million for an orbital flight. I have no idea if those numbers are right. I heard somebody, a well-known person in the space community just the other day, said he thought the $50,000 flight for suborbital could take place very, very soon. So I don't know. I mean, it's 250,000 now, and I'm hearing that price may even go up, and that ain't the right direction. So we'll have to wait and see. So I'm getting to the end here, and that is, what is it about spaceflight? Why do we want to go? And there's something called the overview effect. And this is something that author Frank White wrote about. And it's that when you go into orbit and look down on Earth, that it changes your consciousness and your perspective about Earth. And many astronauts have come back and said how they've been transformed by that experience. You look down at Earth, you don't see borders, you see one humanity. And they come back and their lives are changed and they dedicate themselves a little differently. So that's among the reasons why people want to go. Another reason I would like to share with you by a professor in Australia, Dr. Mariana Singula. And she said space tourism falls into the category of what is known as transformational services, which are construed not just to satisfy basic survival needs. Transformational services enable people to rethink and reset their value system, their priorities and way of thinking, to learn and to self-develop, to change their attitudes, mindsets, or their behavioral or perception about certain things. And I think that's what drives an awful lot of people. It takes me even back to one of the early letters that were written to the Hayden Planetarium by a young woman, Ruby Massengale, a 16-year-old from Mississippi. She calculated that in 1975, which is when they said the flights would take place, she'd be 32. She didn't want to go for selfish reasons like money, fame, or adventure, but was interested in progress for all mankind. Ruby captured the essence of what motivates many who hold the dream of space travel when she concluded, "It seems like this longing is actually a part of me." So I don't know if what I've tried to lay out tonight is longing and part of you. I hope that you have found what I had to share this evening of interest. If you'd like to learn more, I encourage you to maybe buy the book. It's on Amazon as a soft cover or as a Kindle. If you'd like a signed plate, you can send me a self-addressed envelope, and I'd be happy to do that for you, that you can stick in the book. There's other stories in the book that I couldn't even touch on tonight, but there's the history of space tourism to me is fascinating. If you set down the letters that people wrote to Robert Goddard, to the Hayden Planetarium, and to me when I ran the Spaceflight Participant Program, I would bet you couldn't tell what year they were written, because the motivation, the emotion is the same whenever. The penmanship in the 1920s was much better. But other than that, you'd be hard pressed. So it's exciting to be in this industry. I'm a big fan of space tourism. I'm going to keep trying to help make sure other people get to experience space-related activities. And with that, I'm going to close, and I'd be happy to take some questions.
Well, snaps, claps, and thank you for showing us through this. And of course, I'm gonna get one copy of those books. But wow, okay, so first of all, thank you.
By the way, I designed the cover.
Oh, it's awesome. It's a la Tintin.
Yeah.
I think. So what inspired you to get involved with NASA? What was that? And I know it can be a long story, but I guess the nutshell version of
I can give you the nutshell. I was working on my master's in higher education at Southern Illinois University in the early 70s. I met an Air Force colonel who was the head of public affairs in New York. I went to visit his children that were classmates of mine at SIU. And when I got into the car at the airport, the first thing he said to me was, "Hi, we're going to New Worlds." I didn't know what he was talking about, but I said, okay. He in turn took me to meet a couple, Barbara and Earl Hubbard. And Barbara was the daughter of Lewis Marks of Marks Toys. And between the Hubbards and Colonel Whiteside, they started something called the Committee for the Future. And they asked me to become kind of a student leader. So I organized national conferences at SIU that brought people together to talk about their future in space. And then my career just kind of stumbled along. I ended up at NASA, ran the student program to put their experiments on the shuttle, was put in charge of the spaceflight participant program. And it's just been one wonderful ride for the past 40 years of trying to find ways to get people in space.
That is super cool. Thank you for doing.
And the book, by the way, was inspired by the letters I used to get from people begging to fly in the space shuttle. Even though we had the category of teacher and journalist, and we were looking at a third category, maybe to be artist, although that was really hard to figure out how to do, people still wrote us letters, probably 10,000 letters. And this was before internet, so it was handwritten letters. And the emotions people poured in. And I used to try to respond to them individually, and it just became too much. So we had a form letter. But we tried to respect their dream and their emotions. And those letters inspired me to tell this story of the history of this dream and why people want to go.
Awesome. Thank you. And if anyone wants to unmute, not all at once, but I'd encourage questions.
Yeah, before an ordinary person can actually go out into space, I really believe they got to go through some physical training first.
Oh, of course.
Like the average person is not going to be able to withstand the G-forces of takeoff.
Well, certainly training you have to have. Krista Mcauliffe went through the same training as astronauts went through, not to the depth and degree,
Right.
but all the payload specialists and Krista went through training with the astronauts. These other companies that are planning to fly people, such as Axiom, they're training astronauts at facilities at SpaceX and some things down in Houston. Virgin Galactic is going to have its own training program before they take people up on a suborbital flight. Blue Origin will be the same. And so there will be training opportunities to have people go through. And of course, if as going through that training, they like freak out or, hey, look, even when you go through rides at Disneyland for the Mars adventure, they have signs every 10 feet that say, if you got heart problems, you might want to go farther. So I believe that, plus FAA is going to have to approve the protocols for medical acceptance.
Yeah. Mm.
Awesome question.
Yeah, you don't just show up at the launch pad one day and say, let's go. And what was interesting, when I was the head of the program, I got letters from grade school kids to people in their 90s. I can't tell you the number of articles I got from people in their 90s that the local newspaper did an article about them doing, marathons and swimming and bicycling. And they said, we're ready, or kids, the number of kids that wrote to the president to say, why aren't you flying a kid in space? In fact, columnist Jack Anderson, that some of you may remember, was engaged with the Young Astronaut Program. He tried to talk us into flying a kid from the Young Astronaut Program. The Boy Scouts thought a Boy Scout should go. So, this is a dream that's shared by a lot of people. And even after the accident, even at that tragedy where Kristen Mcauliffe, the first spaceflight participant, was tragically killed along with the rest of the crew, people continue to write letters to us to say, please don't stop the program. President Ronald Reagan at the memorial service said, nothing ends here. There will be more spaceflight participants. So you're not going to get rid of this dream. People are going to go. It's going to be expensive for the near future, and not everybody's going to get to go. But you'll find out in the book, there were several examples of companies that are doing promotions, and the winner of a promotion might get to fly in a suborbital flight. So again, this will be onesies and twosies, but over time, the cost will come down. Of course, I've been hearing that for a long time. Eventually, I hope the costs do come down. I hope Elon Musk and Jeff Bezos and these kinds of entrepreneurs are successful in their vision to bring launch costs down so that more people can go.
Excellent. Thanks for sharing. I'm going to start going down the list of unmuted microphones. Maybe we can organize that way. If you'd like to speak, I have a listing here. Unmute your microphone and we will get to your question. Barb, did you have a question?
No, not really. Very interesting, though.
Awesome. I'm glad you're here enjoying it as well with me. Dave.
I just have one comment I'd like your opinion on. What would your impression be if we could get several countries to work together and share ideas, share facilities to make these kind of things happen without competition among countries to do so?
Well, that's a great question. In fact, when President Nixon approved the shuttle program, one of the things he commented on at the time was he hoped that this would be a way to fly people from other countries. So NASA has been international from the beginning. And international, let's look at the International Space Station. It's been up for 20 years with international crews, people from all kinds of countries. I keep wanting to nominate the International Space Station Partnership for the Nobel Peace Prize. We've never had any problems. It's a way of bringing the world together to work together. And NASA is now following that up with the Artemis Program. That's the program to go back to the moon. And they've invited other countries. They just had a lot of signings for what they call the Artemis Accords. And many other countries are involved in that now. Of course, we cooperate with Russia on the space station, with the European Space Agency countries, and someday perhaps with China. That's a very political hot potato. There was a while that NASA was never even allowed to talk to China, but now they've got an aggressive space program. Many other countries have space programs. The number, I should know the number, and I can't think of it off the top of my head, but a lot of countries are creating space programs. And so the more we can get people together, the more we can work together on a common goal, I think the better for humanity. And that again is part of the overview effect or the orbital perspective. You get together working and it raises your consciousness, hopefully. The group I started with in college, the Committee for the Future, Barbara Hubbard's goal was to have humanity go what she called up the next loop of the evolutionary spiral, where our consciousness would rise and we would change and we would think differently. And maybe that's a pie in the sky goal, but it is what has motivated me for almost 50 years in the space program. So I encourage international cooperation. I think you're going to see more and more of it. And as I said, it's especially on front and center now for the Artemis program to go back to the moon.
Well, that's very good to hear. I saw that in the genius and the forethought of Gene Roddenberry with Star Trek, when back in the 60s, when all this stuff was taboo, here he puts up a group in space who have, a Japanese,
Right.
a Russian,
Right.
a black man, I'm all in one crew, and they
Yeah.
all work together.
Yeah.
And I mean, that's just remarkable considering the time frame that was done.
Yeah. Oh, and I'm proud to say that Gene Roddenberry was at my first space conference that I coordinated at Southern Illinois University. And not only did he come to speak, but he brought a reel of Star Trek bloopers that I think may have been one of the first times he showed that publicly to people. And he left the reel with us for several weeks, and we showed it every night in the student union. It was fabulous. And he was a fabulous guy.
Oh, that's terrific. Thank you for sharing that. Definitely have to get your book.
Thank you.
And it's called See You in Orbit. And I see 2orbitproductions.com here. I also had a question, and I don't know how much you can say about it. Can you tell us anything about a space harbor of sorts?
No.
Okay.
Stay tuned. There's going to be some very exciting news later this year that involves opportunities, and it continues my vision to bring the public into space-related activities. So stay tuned.
Wonderful.
And,
We'll definitely check back in with you.
Trust me, I'll be letting you know.
Awesome.
Good.
So Jeff Bezos has an idea where he would make Earth a type of preserve and have everyone living in space, cylinders, some type of cylinder. What are your feelings about let's jump 100 years down the line. Where would you like to see the space program?
Well, if things progress, and I've given up trying to figure out time schedules, because everything in space is harder than it seems. And you'll see through the book, all the things that people said were going to happen by a certain time are almost always wrong. Not always, but a lot of the time. Although we did get to the moon in 10 years. But when you start talking about moving civilization into space, it brings up so many challenges. Now, Elon Musk talks about sending 100 people to Mars by whatever year I said, 2030 or whatever it was. And 100 people can go in that space ship of his. But then there's things like, are you going to have the infrastructure? What kind of life is that going to be? Are you going to be living underground or in a capsule? Or can you get outside and walk around a lot with the right hardware and spacesuits and that type of thing? My vision doesn't extend long enough, quite frankly. I don't want to be one of these people that years later, you're one of those people that said it couldn't be done. There was some cigarette company, I think it was, that used to have a commercial. They said it couldn't be done. They said nobody could do it, but, and then they would show something that occurred. So I have a hard time going out far enough to see, but all I know is technology makes these exponential leaps. New people come in with thinking. The more people that get a chance to experience space will bring their new ideas to the forefront. I can see things happening. I do think there'll be some kind of a lunar station. Will it be a colony of some kind? I think it'll probably follow the Antarctic models to begin with. Elon talks about a base on, people living on Mars for $100,000. The country of United Arab Emirates has a goal You know, they just flew their first spacecraft to orbit Mars a couple of weeks ago. They have a 100-year goal of a colony on Mars. So who knows where this is all going to go? I leave it in the hands of the next generation. I'm semi-retired now. I leave it to the young people. I let them take, and because when I was a young person, I'd look at these people my age at NASA and said, when are these bastards going to retire so I have to get my chance? Well, I'm stepping aside for those young people so they can carry us forward. I have tremendous faith in the next generation of young people and leaders. And I think they're going to do things we can't even begin to imagine today. I mean, just look at what has happened over the last 5 years alone with space. I mean, who knew that Elon Musk was going to come along and start building his own private spaceships? Who knew Jeff Bezos was going to come and have his own private spaceship? And yes, there have been delays and there have been challenges, but isn't it exciting to watch? I mean, to me, there's been a kind of a new renaissance for space. It's back in the news. People are excited about it. It's not just NASA's game anymore. Elon knows how to drum up publicity. Richard Branson knows a little thing or two about how to talk in front of a camera. Other countries are getting involved. So I don't know where it's all going, but I'm as excited as hell to see where it's going.
Awesome. Absolutely awesome. And, I'm excited as well. And you really inspired me to, take a different lens to this issue. So thank you.
Just one clarification. I can't sell the books from my website. You have to go to Amazon, but on that website, I'm going to try to do an update as a blog. I said that I would start that a long time ago, and I haven't quite gotten to it. I've been a little busy, but I'm going to get on it because there's all these new exciting stories to tell. That's kind of like the next chapter of the book. And that is, okay, I ended the book saying that we hope to see Virgin Galactic flying in 2020. Well, it didn't happen. So how about these other things? Inspiration 4, Dear Moon, Axiom. I want to start talking about those things as the next chapter. So give me about 2 weeks or so, and I'll have some new information put up there.
Awesome. And we have, if you'd like to ask a question, just unmute and we'll put you in the queue here. And we have Hannah checking in. Hey, Hannah, do you have any questions or comments?
Yes, I do. Have you ever gotten to go up, and do you have any hopes that you ever will?
Oh, excellent question. I've not gone into space. However, when I worked for the Zero Gravity Corporation, I did get to go on parabolic flights. And I forget how many, I probably did 25 flights or so. I got to do one flight with the teacher and space candidates back in the 80s. And my flights with Zero Gravity were in the early 2000s. So I've had that experience. I've been able to do zero gravity parabolas where you go weightless for about 30 seconds. The most fun thing to do is get to the back of the plane and push off and shoot to the front of the plane and get somebody to take your picture looking like Superman. It is exhilarating. The freedom of weightlessness is really something. And then we didn't just go up there and screw around. We would try to do experiments. We would try to understand what is the factor of no gravity, what's the variable to different things. Teachers, when I was at Northrop Grumman, we had a program called, I forget what we called the program now, but we flew a lot of teachers, and they would do experiments that they could then go back and tell their students about. So that part was exhilarating. Do I want to fly in space? I've kind of developed a little bit of claustrophobia over the years. So in the book I mentioned, I could probably go in space, but I need a spaceship that's big enough with the doors that go whoosh. So I may hang out and wait for that.
Your talk was great.
Thank
really
you.
Interesting.
Thank you. I enjoy doing it.
I can tell.
I'm just honored that an astronomy group invited me, because I was a little afraid that, well, you wouldn't be all that interested in human space flight since you're into the big cosmic scheme of things, which I wish I knew more about. But I'm honored that you're here and that I really like your questions. So thank you so much for being here.
Well, we're honored that you came.
Thank you.
And we love to share the space. And for me, that's what it's all about. So any aspect where it plugs in is, what I try to focus on.
And to follow what you mentioned about you getting a different perspective on things, we've found that from observing the sky. You spend a lot of time under the heavens and see what's out there and see how small we are. You get a different perspective of ourselves and our place in the universe.
Yeah.
So I know that feeling.
Great. Have you all ever had a chance to see the Hubble IMAX movie?
No, I'm not.
Oh, you all need to do a field trip someday to go see. I don't know if it's still at the Air and Space Museum or it must be somewhere, but it will blow your mind. It's footage from Hubble. It incorporates. There was one scene where they were going into the belt of Orion, and I'm going like, how do they do that? I happen to be sitting next to the head of space science at NASA headquarters, and he said, "Oh, well, that part's an artist's conception." But I mean, it's so mind-boggling when they take you out and you start to see the expanse of the universe and how big it is and how many galaxies. And it absolutely blew my mind. And I got to go back and see it again. But you astronomers would love it.
Yes, it was incredible.
Oh, did you see it, Barbara?
Yeah.
Yeah. Am I lying?
Nope. It's like you want to hang on to something while you're going through it.
Yeah. Anybody else?
Well, we would love to take you out observing when possible. If you'd like, you have an invitation. We have plenty of events and things like that, which I'm sure we'll get into in just a moment.
I'm going to take you up on that. As I said, I get up to Bucks County every now and then to Bertrandville, and I don't think it's too far from where you are, and I'd love to do that. I don't get to do enough astronomy things, so it'd be super. And I also encourage you to you all keep your eyes on the news over, the next few months or so. There's so many exciting things going on in space right now, and with the space station and with the launches, with SpaceX launching their Falcon 9 and sending crew members up to the station, and will Boeing get it together to fly their Starliner soon and eventually become a competitor to SpaceX. There's just, as I said, we're in the middle of a space renaissance, and there's a lot happening commercially, government-wise, other countries, and it's just a great time to be alive with the space program.
Yeah, I watch as many of the launches as I can.
Yeah.
Although I don't get up at 3 o'clock in the morning to watch SpaceX launch. I've seen enough of those that I don't need to get up at 3.
My greatest job at NASA was when I was the head of public outreach. My group was in charge of guest operations for shuttle launches. So I got to see a lot of launches and get to bring people into that experience and to feed off that energy of people seeing a launch. To me, it's a very spiritual experience to see a launch.
Absolutely. I think it'd be great once things let up if we can all head down to the Mars facility, Mid-Atlantic Regional Space.
Oh, yeah. Well, that's the one that I can see from, I live on a lake and I can see it from the beach down the street. You can see the contrail go up. It is,
we can actually see him from up here. I've seen him from up here.
Oh, good.
We're near where I am. There's a school kind of on top of a really high hill. And
very cool.
You can see them. You can see the separation.
Yeah.
If they're going the right direction.
Great.
Absolutely.
And then, of course, and you astronomers probably already know this, you can see the space station go overhead periodically. So
all the time.
There's a website that NASA has, and you put in your, I don't know, zip code or state or city or whatever, and it will tell you when it's coming overhead in your area.
There's an app that does that too, that I
Yeah.
have.
Yeah. Looks
I-
like Eric has unmuted his microphone. Eric, did you have any questions?
Oh, I just wanted to thank him for this whole thing. This was really cool. As I think every one of us have been watching all the news and seeing the successes and the failures of that, and just kind of projecting out into the future that at some point in time they're going to be successful enough to put tourists in space, and I think that's a thing that's going to be really cool. Thank you very much for the talk tonight.
Thank you for your comments, Eric.
Yeah, and with that, we all thank you for joining us. Whether it's via Zoom or any other way, I'm sure we'll get to explore more ideas as we thumb through these pages here. But with that, I think we'll call it for our March 2021 meeting, and keep on looking up, keep on dreaming forward, and
See you in orbit.
We'll
Yeah.
see you in orbit.
Well, Alan,
Yeah.
we hope to see you next to our telescope sometime.
Yes.
Yeah, let us know when
I'm going to take you up on that.
Yeah, let
we
Elon
have-
know when you're coming up, and we'll
Okay.
arrange a private showing.
All right.
We have some very good instruments, and it's really scary. We actually know how to use them.
Some of us do.
Some of us do. Okay.
All right. Well, take care, everyone. With that, that concludes our meeting. Stay tuned. There will be an email with upcoming events. Barb, anything we wanted to shout out in the near future?
I included in the email that I sent out last night about the Night Sky Network webinar on, I think it's the 23rd.
Right. So check your emails. There will be follow-ups. Of course, Dark Window is coming up this weekend. We have some clear Saturday night skies. So looks like we have our new moon lining up with good weather. So, check your batteries before you end up in the field. Go team Finders Go. Boo team Telrad. And we'll catch up until next meeting. Reach out to the Berks County Amateur Astronomical Society. Find us on Facebook, the website berksastronomy.org, or any of us here. Feel free to ask any questions, and we will do our best to share our space. Thanks everyone for joining.
Oh, by
Good
the
night,
way,
everyone.
This
Bye.
right now is a time frame when there's a lot of sunspot activity that's projected for the future. And so those of you who are hams, there will be times when you can get all the way around to the other side of the world just because of the sunspot activity. So this is something for the future.
Super cool. Yeah, thanks for sharing that. I know there's a Reading radio club.
Yes,
that
there is.
Loop a little bit. Also, there's a program at Millersville for space weather, and I've taken an interest in that. We'll see if I ever get to getting, but I am working on getting my general ham license. So we'll definitely keep me in the loop with that. And as for solar astronomy, there's something in the works to convert an old satellite dish into a radio telescope. So the world collide.
So
yeah.
Have you started studying for it? Do you have your technician?
No.
Okay.
No,
So talk to me, and I will tell you how to study for the ham radio tests. And it's not hard to take the technician and the general classes. You can learn on that, with not too much effort. A few hours of study. Extra, on the other hand, I spent about 200 hours studying for that. But
International Space Station.
I'm sorry. No, I have tried a few times, but during the times I think that I've tried, nobody was listening, and so it's you don't get much of a window on there, and you have to have a a directional antenna that can move with the space station, actually a little bit ahead of it. And so, the problem is they're not always listening on that. They have a station up there, a ham radio set up there, but they're not always listening. So, that's part of the problem on there. But I've known a lot of people who just caught them at the right time when they were listening, and they were able to talk to the space station as it went over, and it goes over fairly fast. I mean, it's surprisingly fast when you're trying to track it. So, at any rate.
Well, it's a little over my head, but
tell me, Alon, why were you promoting regular finder scopes and poo-pooing Telrads?
just sort of it was a funny field time where someone's battery died in the Telrad, and someone said, well, that's why I never use those. I only use my finder scopes. And so it started this whole thing.
Okay.
It ought to be like a volleyball match one day. I'm sure it'll get to something in the future.
Been there, done that. Well, if you really like the finder scopes over at Telrad, I'll challenge you to find the first 10 Messier objects with my Telrad over your finder.
Messier season is on. You're on.
Not a problem. Yeah, I'll have 10 before you have 5.
All right, we'll hash this out. We'll hash this out. All right. With that, thanks everyone for joining.
Good night, everyone.
Good night.
Good night. Thank
Bye.
you very much.
Thank you, Alan.
Thank you.
And a very special thank you.